The federal courthouse in downtown Minneapolis fell silent as Judge Marcus Thompson entered Courtroom 4B. His black robes flowed behind him as he approached the bench, the morning light streaming through tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. But today wasn't just another day in his 20-year judicial career. Today, justice would come full circle in the most unexpected way. As Marcus settled into his chair and looked down at the two police officers standing before him, time seemed to freeze. Officers David Rodriguez and Jake Patterson shifted uncomfortably, their eyes widening in recognition. Less than 24 hours ago, these same men had arrested him at a rest stop, treating him like a common criminal based solely on the color of his skin. They had no idea that the suspicious black man they'd humiliated and thrown in jail was actually a federal judge who would soon preside over their disciplinary hearing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that courtroom. What happened next would change all their lives forever and teach us all a powerful lesson about dignity, justice, and the unexpected ways the universe sometimes rights its wrongs. This is that incredible true story. Judge Marcus Thompson had traveled a long road to reach that federal bench. Born in the projects of North Minneapolis to teenage parents who died in a car accident when he was just 8 years old, Marcus was raised by his grandmother, Mama Rose, in a cramped two-bedroom apartment that always smelled like cornbread and hope. "Baby," Mama Rose would tell him every morning as she braided his hair before school, "you got greatness in you. Don't let nobody tell you different. But more important than being great, you be good. You be kind. You treat people right, even when they don't treat you right." Those words echoed in Marcus's mind as he worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, then transferred to University of Minnesota on a full scholarship. While his classmates partied on weekends, Marcus studied in the library until closing time, driven by the memory of his grandmother's weather hands and unwavering faith in him. After graduating summa cum laude from law school, Marcus spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney, fighting for justice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. His reputation for fairness and integrity caught the attention of federal officials, and at 45, he was appointed to federal bench, the youngest African-American federal judge in Minnesota's history. Now, at 52, Marcus had presided over thousands of cases, from corporate fraud to civil rights violations. He was known for his measured temperament, his thorough preparation, and his ability to see the humanity in everyone who entered his courtroom. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what happened on that October evening that would test everything Mama Rose had taught him about dignity and grace under pressure. Marcus was driving home from a judicial conference in Chicago, his Mercedes sedan loaded with legal briefs and conference materials. It had been a long 3 days of seminars and networking, and he was exhausted. The October evening was crisp and clear, but as the miles stretched on to Wisconsin into Minnesota, fatigue began to set in. He'd been driving for nearly 6 hours when he saw the rest stop sign on Interstate 35. His eyes were burning, and he knew he needed a break. The smart thing would be to pull over, maybe grab a coffee, stretch his legs, and then continue the last hour home to his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage daughters. The rest stop was nearly empty when he pulled in just a few semi-trucks parked in the back and a couple cars scattered across the lot. Marcus parked under a light near the vending machines, turned off the engine, and leaned his seat back. He'd just rest his eyes for a few minutes, he told himself. Just long enough to feel safe driving again. He'd been there maybe 20 minutes when the police cruiser pulled up. Officers David Rodriguez and Jake Patterson had been partners for 3 years, patrolling the rural highways outside the Twin Cities. Rodriguez, a 10-year veteran with a chip on his shoulder and a history of complaints that somehow never stuck, was training Patterson, a younger officer who joined the force 2 years earlier with genuine intentions but had fallen under Rodriguez's toxic influence. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, pointing to Marcus's car as they circled the rest stop. Black guy in a Mercedes, just sitting there, probably dealing drugs or casing the place. Patterson felt uncomfortable, but said nothing. He'd learned that disagreeing with Rodriguez only made things worse, and he needed this job to support his young family. They pulled up behind Marcus's car, their spotlight flooding his vehicle with harsh white light. Marcus woke with start, immediately disoriented. Through his rear-view mirror, he could see 2 officers approaching his car, hands on their weapons. Marcus slowly rolled down his window, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel, a routine he'd learned as a young black man growing up in Minneapolis, reinforced by countless stories from friends and family about police encounters gone wrong. "Evening, officers," Marcus said calmly. "Is there a problem?" "Step out of the vehicle," Rodriguez commanded, his voice harsh and aggressive. "Keep your hands where I can see them." "May I ask what this is about?" Marcus asked, still maintaining his composure despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now!" Marcus complied, moving slowly and deliberately. At 6 feet tall with a dignified bearing, he cut an impressive figure even in his wrinkled conference clothes. But to Rodriguez, he was just another black man who needed to be put in his place. "What are you doing here?" Patterson asked, following his partner's lead, but with less venom in his voice. "I was driving home from Chicago and got tired. I pulled over to rest for a few minutes before continuing my drive. I live about an hour north of here." "Yeah, right," Rodriguez sneered. "And I suppose you just happen to have a Mercedes, too. Where'd you steal it?" Marcus felt a familiar knot in his stomach that came with these encounters, but Mama Rose's voice echoed in his head. "Keep your dignity, baby. Don't let them take that from you." "Officers, I can show you my registration and insurance if you'd like. I'm Judge Marcus Thompson with the Federal District Court. I was attending a judicial conference in Chicago, and I'm heading home." Rodriguez laughed a cold, ugly sound. "Oh, we got us a comedian here, Jake. A federal judge. That's rich." "Sir, may I reach for my wallet to show you my identification?" "Real slow," Patterson said, his hand still on his weapon. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Extracting his driver's license and federal judicial ID, Rodriguez snatched them from his hands, barely glancing at them before handing them to Patterson. "Fake IDs," Rodriguez announced without even examining them properly. "Probably bought them on the street." Patterson looked more closely at the credentials. Something about them seemed legitimate: the federal seal, the official formatting, the quality of the materials. But Rodriguez was his training officer, and he'd learned not to question him in front of suspects. "These look pretty convincing," Patterson said hesitantly. "That's the point," Rodriguez snapped. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. Officers, please. I understand you're doing your job, but if you'll just call the courthouse." "I said turn around." Rodriguez shoved Marcus against the car, sending his coffee cup flying and spilling across the pavement. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place echoed across the empty rest stop. Marcus closed his eyes and thought of Mama Rose. "Dignity," he whispered to himself. "Don't let them take your dignity." As they loaded him into the back of the police cruiser, Marcus noticed the body cameras both officers were wearing. At least there would be a record of this, he thought. At least the truth would come out eventually. The county jail was exactly what Marcus expected: fluorescent lights, concrete walls, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with desperation. As they processed him, fingerprinting and photographing him like a common criminal, Marcus maintained his composure, even as his heart broke a little more with each indignity. "One phone call," the desk sergeant said, sliding an old rotary phone across the counter. Marcus called his wife Sarah, waking her from sleep. "Marcus? Where are you? I expected you home hours ago." "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. I've been arrested. I'm at the Washington County Jail. I need you to call David Morrison and have him come down here immediately." David Morrison was Marcus's longtime friend and one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. If anyone could sort this mess out quickly, it would be David. Arrested? For what? "Marcus, what happened?" "I'll explain everything later. Just call David and tell him it's urgent. And Sarah called Judge Henderson and let her know I might not be in court tomorrow morning." As Marcus was led to sell a small concrete box with a thin mattress and a metal toilet, he thought about the hundreds of people he'd sentenced over the years. How many of them had spent their first night in jail feeling exactly like this? Humiliated, angry, but mostly just tired. Tired of fighting a system that seemed designed to crush anyone who didn't fit the right profile. He lay on the narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, and thought about tomorrow. By now, Rodriguez and Patterson had probably discovered their mistake. The fake ID story would fall apart the moment anyone made a simple phone call. But the damage was done. Marcus had been arrested, fingerprinted, and booked like a criminal. The local news would probably pick up the story. His reputation, built over decades of service, could be tarnished by one night of racist assumptions and police misconduct. But more than his own reputation, Marcus thought about justice. Real justice. The kind Mama Rose had taught him about not revenge, but accountability. Not hatred, but consequences for actions. These officers had violated their oath, trampled on his civil rights, and potentially ruined an innocent man's life. They needed to face the consequences of their choices. As morning light began to filter through the small window of his cell, Marcus made a decision. He wouldn't use his influence to make this go away quietly. He would let the system work as it was supposed to work. And if that system brought Rodriguez and Patterson before his bench, he would show them what real justice looked like. David Morrison arrived at the jail at 6 a.m. with fire in his eyes and a briefcase full of legal ammunition. By 7 a.m., the charges against Marcus had been dropped, the arrest expunged from the system, and Internal Affairs had launched a full investigation into the conduct of officers Rodriguez and Patterson. They're claiming you match the description of a suspect in an armed robbery, David explained as they sat in his car outside the jail. Apparently, the suspect was described as a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, driving a dark-colored luxury vehicle. Marcus almost laughed. So, basically, any successful black man could fit that description. That's exactly what I told the district attorney. Marcus, we need to talk about what you want to do here. This is going to be a big story. Federal judge falsely arrested, civil rights violation, the whole thing. You could own half the county when we're done with the lawsuit. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the sun rise over the jail parking lot. What's happening with the officers? Internal Affairs is reviewing everything. Body cam footage, witness statements, the whole thing. Depending on what they find, they could face disciplinary action, suspension, even termination. And if they contest the findings, then it goes to a hearing. Could be administrative, could be federal civil rights charges. Depends on how bad the footage looks. Marcus nodded slowly. I want to see that footage, David. I want to know exactly what those cameras recorded. 2 hours later, sitting in the district attorney's office, Marcus watched the body cam footage that would change everything. The video was damning Rodriguez's racist assumptions, his refusal to properly examine Marcus's credentials, his aggressive and unprofessional conduct throughout the encounter. But what struck Marcus most was Patterson's obvious discomfort with the situation and his repeated attempts to de-escalate his partner's aggression. The young one seemed conflicted, Marcus observed. Patterson, the DA said, 2 years on the force, no prior complaints. Rodriguez, on the other hand, has a file thick as a phone book. Excessive force complaints, allegations of racial profiling, use of inappropriate language. Internal Affairs has been building a case against him for months. As Marcus drove home that morning, he thought about Patterson. Everyone deserved a second chance. Mama Rose used to say, everyone deserved the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and become better. But Rodriguez was different. Some people had to face the full consequences of their choices before they would change. And some people, Marcus had learned in 20 years on the bench, simply weren't capable of change at all. 3 weeks later, Marcus was in his chambers reviewing briefs when his clerk knocked on the door. Your Honor, there's a case that's been assigned to your docket. Internal Affairs disciplinary hearing for 2 police officers. The clerk's office wanted to make sure there wasn't a conflict of interest. Marcus looked up from his papers. What are the officers' names? Rodriguez and Patterson, Your Honor. Washington County Sheriff's Department. Marcus set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. After 3 weeks of depositions, investigations, and media coverage, the case had finally made its way to his courtroom. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Your Honor, should I have this reassigned to another judge? Marcus thought about Mama Rose, about dignity and justice, about the young officer who had seemed uncomfortable with his partner's conduct, and about the veteran officer who had treated him like a criminal based solely on the color of his skin. No, Marcus said finally. I'll hear the case. Schedule it for next Monday morning. That weekend, Marcus spent hours reviewing the case files, the body cam footage, and the internal affairs investigation. He called his mentor, retired Judge William Henderson, for advice. "Marcus, you sure you want to do this? Nobody would blame you for recusing yourself." "Bill, I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks. If I recuse myself, these officers go before another judge who didn't experience what they did that night. They face consequences, maybe, but they never have to confront the human impact of their actions. They never have to look into the eyes of the man they humiliated and explain themselves. And you think that's justice? I think that's the beginning of justice. Real accountability requires facing the people you wronged. And if there's going to be any hope of change, real change, it has to start with truth." Judge Henderson was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother will be proud, son, but be careful. Don't let your personal experience cloud your judgment." "It won't cloud my judgment, Bill. It will inform it. There's a difference." Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that made the federal courthouse's marble columns gleam like pillars of justice. Marcus arrived early, as was his custom, spending time in his chambers reviewing the case one final time and preparing himself mentally for what was to come. At 9 a.m. sharp, he entered Courtroom 4B. The gallery was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, and members of the law enforcement community. This case had drawn national attention, a federal judge presiding over the disciplinary hearing of officers who had arrested him. Everyone wanted to see how justice would play out. Officers Rodriguez and Patterson stood at the defendant's table with their union representative and attorney. Rodriguez maintains defiant posture, jaw set, staring straight ahead. Patterson looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot, occasionally glancing up at Marcus with what looked like genuine remorse. "This hearing will come to order," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the bench. "We are here today to review the conduct of Officers David Rodriguez and Jake Patterson of the Washington County Sheriff's Department in connection with the arrest of a citizen at a rest stop on Interstate 35 on October 15th. The irony of referring to himself as a citizen wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. "Before we begin, I want to address the obvious issue. I am the citizen who was arrested by these officers. I have given careful consideration to whether I should recuse myself from this case, and I have decided that justice is best served by proceeding. Both officers will receive a fair hearing based on the evidence and the law, nothing more and nothing less." The next 2 hours were methodical and thorough. The body cam footage was played in its entirety. Every racist assumption and illegal action laid bare for the courtroom to see. Internal affairs investigators testified about Rodriguez's history of complaints and Patterson's previously clean record. Character witnesses spoke about both men former colleagues who described Rodriguez as aggressive and prejudiced, and others who painted Patterson as a good man who had lost his way. Throughout it all, Marcus maintained his judicial composure, asking pointed questions but never allowing personal emotion to color his proceedings. When the evidence phase concluded, he turned to the officers. "Officers Rodriguez and Patterson, you have the right to make a statement before I render my decision. Officer Patterson, would you like to speak first?" Patterson stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the podium. "Your Honor, I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what happened that night. I know I failed you, failed my oath, failed everything I thought I stood for when I became a police officer." His voice cracked with emotion. "I was supposed to protect and serve, and instead I stood by while my partner violated your rights based on nothing but prejudice and assumptions." He paused, wiping his eyes. "I keep thinking about my daughter, Your Honor. She's only 5 years old, but she's already asking me about my job, about whether I help people or hurt people. After that night, I honestly don't know how to answer her anymore." Patterson looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect another chance. But I want you to know that what happened that night changed me. It opened my eyes to realities I had been ignoring, to the ways the system I thought I was serving can be used to harm innocent people. If I never wear a badge again, maybe that's what I deserve. But if I do get another chance, I swear to you that I will spend every day of my career making sure this never happens to anyone else." The courtroom was silent as Patterson sat down. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes, caught up in the raw emotion of the moment. Rodriguez's response was entirely different. "Your Honor, I stand by my actions that night. We had to report a suspicious person, and we investigated. Maybe the arrest was premature, but we were following department protocol. If this gentleman was really a federal judge, he should have been more cooperative instead of giving us attitude." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Rodriguez's attorney looked mortified, but Rodriguez continued. "I've been doing this job for 10 years, and I know suspicious behavior when I see it. A black man in an expensive car at a rest stop late at night? That's textbook drug dealer behavior. If people don't want to be profiled, maybe they shouldn't fit the profile." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at Rodriguez for a long moment, seeing not just the officer who had arrested him, but every racist assumption, every abuse of power, every injustice he had spent his career fighting against. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Officer Rodriguez, in 20 years on this bench, I have heard many defendants try to justify their actions. I have heard excuses, explanations, and rationalizations for every kind of misconduct imaginable. But rarely have I heard someone so completely fail to understand the gravity of their actions or the harm they have caused." He stood up, his robes flowing behind him as he stepped down from the bench, an unusual move that commanded everyone's attention. "Let me tell you what I saw on that body camera footage, Officer Rodriguez. I saw a man who decided I was guilty of something before he even spoke to me. I saw a man who refused to examine my credentials because they didn't fit his preconceived notions. I saw a man who was so committed to his racist assumptions that he was willing to arrest a federal judge rather than admit he might be wrong." Marcus's voice rose with controlled passion. "But more than that, I saw a man who has forgotten the sacred trust that comes with wearing a police badge. You took an oath to protect and serve all citizens, regardless of race, color, or economic status. You violated that oath not just that night, but apparently every day of your career based on the pattern of complaints in your file." He turned to Patterson. "Officer Patterson, I saw something different in you. I saw a man who was uncomfortable with what was happening, but lacked the courage to stand up to his partner. I saw a man who has allowed himself to be corrupted by bad influences, but who still has a conscience." Marcus returned to his seat, the weight of his next words settling over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. "The badge you wear is not a license to harass, intimidate, or profile citizens. It is a responsibility to protect the constitutional rights of every person you encounter, even when they don't look like you, even when they make you uncomfortable, even when they challenge your assumptions about who belongs where." He looked directly at Rodriguez. "Officer Rodriguez, your conduct that night was not just unprofessional, it was criminal. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights, committed false imprisonment, and engaged in a pattern of racial profiling that has no place in American law enforcement. More importantly, you have shown no remorse, no understanding of the harm you cause, and no capacity for the kind of change that would make you fit to wear a badge." The courtroom held its breath as Marcus rendered his judgment. "Officer Rodriguez, you are hereby terminated from the Washington County Sheriff's Department, effective immediately. You are permanently barred from employment in any law enforcement capacity in the state of Minnesota. Additionally, I am referring this case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for possible federal civil rights charges." Rodriguez's face flushed red with anger, but his attorney quickly placed a restraining hand on his arm. Marcus turned to Patterson. "Officer Patterson, your conduct that night was also unacceptable. You stood by while your partner violated a citizen's rights, and your silence made you complicit in his actions. However, I believe your remorse is genuine, and I believe you have the capacity to learn from this experience and become the kind of officer your community deserves." He paused, weighing his words carefully. "You are hereby suspended without pay for 6 months. During that time, you will complete 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations in Minneapolis, undergo sensitivity training and bias awareness counseling, and write a detailed report on the history of racial profiling in American law enforcement. If you successfully complete these requirements and demonstrate genuine understanding of the issues involved, you may petition for reinstatement to the force." Patterson nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Your Honor. I won't let you down." As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus remained at the bench, watching the two officers leave with very different futures ahead of them. Rodriguez stormed out, his career in ruins, but his attitude unchanged. Patterson walked slowly, carrying the weight of his mistakes, but also the hope of redemption. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his study home, reflecting on the day's events. Sarah brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "How do you feel?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Mama Rose. She used to say that justice isn't about revenge, it's about making things right. Not just punishment, but restoration. Healing. Do you think you accomplished that today?" "I think I started it. Rodriguez may never change, but at least he can't hurt anyone else in uniform. And Patterson, I saw something in his eyes today. Real remorse. Real understanding. Maybe he can become the kind of officer who prevents incidents like this instead of causing them." 3 months later, Marcus received a letter from Patterson. The young officer was halfway through his community service, working with inner-city youth programs and learning about the communities he had sworn to protect. He wrote about the conversations he'd had with young black men who had been profiled and harassed by police, about the fear in their eyes and the pain in their stories. "Your Honor," the letter read, "I understand now that what happened that night wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of injustice that I have been blind to. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again. Thank you for giving me that chance." 6 months later, Patterson successfully completed his requirements and was reinstated to the force. He went on to become a vocal advocate for police reform, training new officers about bias and building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve. He never forgot the lesson he learned that night at the rest stop, that the badge comes with the responsibility to see the humanity in every person you encounter. Rodriguez, meanwhile, moved to another state and tried to find work in private security. But his reputation followed him, and he struggled to find employment. Some people, Marcus reflected, have to face the full consequences of their choices before they'll consider changing. And some never change at all. Today, 5 years later, Judge Marcus Thompson continues to serve on the federal bench with the same dignity and integrity that carried him through that terrible night at the rest stop. The incident has become a powerful example of how justice sometimes works in unexpected ways, how the universe has a way of bringing accountability full circle. Marcus often speaks to police academies and civil rights organizations about that night, sharing the lesson Mama Rose taught him so many years ago, that dignity is something no one can take from you, and that real justice isn't about revenge, it's about making things right. The story reminds us that in a world where injustice can seem overwhelming, where the system can seem stacked against the innocent and the powerless, sometimes the scales of justice balance in ways we never expect. Sometimes the person you wrong today is the person who will judge you tomorrow. And sometimes, just sometimes, that judgment comes not with vengeance, but with the kind of wisdom that can change hearts and minds.